I'm Danny Robinson, and I'm the product owner for Twinkl PE Resources, which includes the Twinkl Move scheme of work and also our new Twinkl Swim scheme, which you'll see on the website at the beginning of August. I'll chat a little bit more about that later near the end. I work alongside a fantastic team of PE specialists who create all of the PE content that you'll see on the website. Before joining Twinkl, I taught in EYFS and also Key Stage 1 and spent some of this time working as PE subject lead too. I've worked alongside some absolutely brilliant teaching assistants and fully appreciate the important role that you all play in schools. And I know just how valuable you are in supporting inclusive PE.
Hi, my name is Amy. I've got 14 years about primary teaching experience in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, which also includes being PE subject leader, healthy school subject leader. I've been at Twinkl since 2016, and I'm a content writer. And I'm still lucky enough to be working at the local primary school doing a little bit of just PE teaching, which is my passion. And, you know, basically it's just to give a love of all of sport and PE for all primary children so that they have a positive experience and carry it through into their later life, really.
In this session, we'll begin by looking a little bit at the background information around PE, and then after that, we'll move on to look at some more practical strategies that you can use to support inclusion in PE. And by inclusion, we aren't just talking about including pupils with SEND, we mean enabling all pupils, including those with SEND, to access, enjoy, and make progress in PE. So we can't possibly cover every single need or every single scenario that you may encounter in this webinar, but hopefully what we can do is give you some techniques and some methods to take away and apply in lessons, and also to tailor these to the unique needs of the children and young people that you work with, as well as, of course, to the equipment and facilities that you've got access to in your setting. And then we'll go on to speak about some specific barriers that you may experience and how best to support these. Then at the end, there will be a question and answer session where we'll answer any questions that you have asked during this webinar.
So to start with, apologies if you're already very familiar with these. If you click it again, Danny, I think the PE physical education pops up. I hope I'm right. Top left, it's not, it should say physical education. There we go. You might be fully aware of what the three different terms mean that you will hear being sort of spoken about in school, but basically just to go over those. So physical education is the planned progressive learning, the curriculum-based stuff, which is dance, gymnastics, athletics, games, OAA, which stands for outdoor adventurous activities, and also curriculum swimming. If you hear about school sport, that's more the extracurricular stuff, inter and intra-school competitions, and then physical activity would encompass physical education and school sport, and is indoor, outdoor play, active travel, active learning, all these sort of movement breaks. It's any sort of form of physical activity.
So the Chief Medical Officers recommend that all children are active for at least 60 minutes a day, and 30 of these active minutes should be delivered by schools. They also recommend that children under 5 have at least 3 hours physical activity per day. So can I just ask you quickly to use the reaction button just to show if your setting currently provides 30 active minutes per day for all pupils? Great, I can see a mix of reactions coming through, but it's great to see so many thumbs up and to see that there is sort of so many schools that are providing these active minutes already. I know it can be really, really difficult to incorporate these 30 active minutes into the school day, but it's definitely something where if your school don't necessarily provide it at the minute, it's a conversation maybe to have with the PE subject lead or with the class teacher on how you can support them to incorporate more physical activity into the day. This might include sort of structured physical activity at break times as well. And then the DfE school sport plan advises that schools should aim to teach 2 hours PE per week. Now, this isn't statutory guidance. However, for all pupils to be able to make sufficient progress in PE and leave school physically literate, this is really what we need to be aimed to be teaching. In early years, this also might look different to 2 hours of formal PE lessons. Often you have sort of 1 hour of PE lesson and then physical development that's incorporated through continuous provision. Ideally as well, interventions for other subjects won't take place during PE time because PE develops so many essential skills, which Amy will just talk about in a minute.
So yeah, I'm sure we're aware of the numerous benefits of PE and physical activity. I'll outline some of them here now. So obviously your physical health, motor skills, improves and enhances motor skills. And that could be gross motor skills, or you might hear fundamental movement skills being talked about, which is your running, throwing, jumping, kicking, sort of the foundational skills needed to then move into more sports specific skills. Improves coordination, balance and core strength, spatial awareness, confidence and self-esteem, social skills with the teamwork element that you will get in PE and school sport, increased concentration. So you might have heard of physically active learning before, which is where you would, teachers try to, or people within education might try to fuse movement with learning. And by doing that movement, obviously it increases blood and oxygen flow, which will then have a positive effect on the cognitive development of children. And then as a result of that, it can enhance academic performance and behaviour, have greater focus on tasks. So weaving in that physical activity where you can during the school day, not just through your PE lessons, is obviously has huge benefits for the children. Stress reduction and building strength.
So now we're just going to have a quick look at how children progress in PE, so from reception through to the end of Key Stage 2. The overarching aim is that all pupils will leave primary school physically literate and go on to lead healthy and active lifestyles. So progression in PE also isn't just about the physical skills. Often talk about the 3 pillars of progression. So there's motor competence, which is your sort of physical skills, rule, strategy and tactics, and also healthy participation. So that's things like communication, team values, teamwork. So in early years, there's a big focus on the physical development strand of the early years curriculum, which focuses on developing gross motor skills like running, jumping and balance. How children negotiate space and awareness of how their body moves, and sort of the spatial awareness as well. Rule, strategies and tactics comes into looking at following really simple rules to play a game, and healthy participation at this level would be looking at things like sharing and working with a partner on a task.
So at Key Stage 1, it's really about building the foundations, as I mentioned before, so the fundamental movement skills, which underpin basically all of the other sports-specific stuff that the children would do, perhaps a bit higher up in the school. That's sort of Key Stage 1, that's when you would develop these, so running, jumping, throwing, catching, balancing, hopping, skipping. Obviously the focus is also on continuing to work with others, looking into simple tactics. For example, literally, I don't know, in an invasion game type game, it would just be moving into space, something like that. And yeah, starting to look at team games, and then the sort of gymnastics and dance side of the curriculum, creating and performing simple dances. And then in Key Stage 2, we sort of combine the fundamental movement skills that have been taught in early years and Key Stage 1, and they're combined and applied into sort of game style situations. So for example, you might be doing something like hurdling in athletics, where in early years in Key Stage 1, you've taught the skills of running and 1 foot to 1 foot jumping. And then when it comes to doing hurdles, you're combining the skills of running and 1 foot to 1 foot jumping. Or in basketball, where you're looking at bouncing the ball, throwing the ball, catching the ball,
running, as well as some of the tactics that you've looked at in Key Stage 1, and it's about putting all of that together into a mini game situation. You also start to learn some more sport-specific rules and skills, and we introduce OAA, which, as Amy mentioned earlier, is outdoor adventurous activities. So this includes things like orienteering and team challenges. And we look at rules, strategies and tactics sort of at a much deeper level. So this will develop into like choosing which pass to make or which space to hit the ball into in rounders. And we look at teamwork, communication and collaboration, as well as sort of developing your skills, refining your skills and improving your skills sort of based on feedback. And this also feeds into things like performance in dance and gymnastics. There's a really strong focus on personal best in Key Stage 2 as well. So it's not necessarily just about who can jump the fastest, who can jump the furthest, or who can run the quickest. It's actually about who's made that biggest improvement. Okay, so now we're going to go on to look at some practical strategies that you can use to differentiate PE activities for pupils or groups of pupils that you work with. So the first one we're going to look at is the STEP principle, which I hope you'll find a really useful tool for supporting inclusive practice. It looks at basically how to adapt and modify activities to include all pupils.
So the S in STEP stands for space, and it's where is the activity happening, basically. So and what you can do with that space to help adapt it for the different abilities within your group. So changing the size of the area or introducing specific zones, thinking about the playing surface that you're on, how, for example, how bouncy the ball would be on that surface, and changing it or modifying it to make it easier or sometimes harder. The height of activity, that could be something like a tabletop activity, where it's a sort of mini version of a game being played on a tabletop, or everybody perhaps is on the floor and doing it right from the ground level. It might be the positioning of a target further or closer to you, or a different starting point for some children. So that's how you would use space to sort of modify activities within your PE lessons.
Okay, and then the T in STEP stands for task. So some of the ways that you might adapt or modify the task are by adapting the aim or the outcome of the game. So if you were playing a game where pupils have to complete 5 passes, you might actually adapt the game for some pupils and their target might just be to complete 3 passes in a row, or you might increase it to make it more challenging, up to 7 passes. In something like gymnastics, you might ask pupils to do a 3-point balance instead of a 1-point balance if they were finding it difficult to balance on 1 point. You could modify the rules. So, for example, going back to basketball, you might allow a pupil to bounce 2-handed in a mini game if they haven't yet mastered the 1-handed bouncing skills that enables them to participate at the same level as their peers. We can also increase and decrease the time given. So you might set a longer time limit or a shorter time limit, which will simplify or add challenge to the activity. Or you might even remove the time limit completely, because some pupils might find the pressure of a time limit quite stressful. So by removing this, it reduces that stress. For example, if you gave them, if the starter activity was, how many beanbags can you throw into a hoop in a minute? They might find that time limit quite stressful. So what you could say instead is, okay, I'm going to give you 10 beanbags. How many of these beanbags can you get into the hoop? So that's just one way that you could adapt it.
So on to E, which is equipment. So before we share this next slide, that was close. I'm going to ask a question. So how do you think you could adapt an activity within a lesson, perhaps a PE lesson, based on the equipment that is used? So you could put suggestions in the comments. So how would equipment be used within the STEP principle to help adapt or differentiate a lesson? Are any coming in?
Oh,
Okay.
great. Yes. So we've got smaller or larger equipment, such as the size of different size balls and rackets. Someone else has said the size of the ball. Changing balls for bean bags or using bigger hoops. Bean bags instead of balls. Different size equipment, different size balls. Allow a different hold, e.g. two-handed instead of one-handed. Moving items closer together or further apart.
Amazing.
Oh.
Yeah, balloons. I was going to mention balloons. That's you've got some great ideas. That's amazing. Yeah. So basically that if we go on to the next slide with the list, you've pretty much come up with most of them, I think. So yeah, lighter or slow movement, for example, balloons. Balloons are amazing for things like that. Obviously more appropriate for indoor rather than probably outdoor. But if you've got a pack of balloons, I think they would, you know, obviously the slow movement of the balloon really helps with hand-eye coordination skills. The size of equipment, so that could be a bat with a larger surface area or a bigger ball. Another one that I don't know if it was mentioned, it might be done, is you know, the foot markers you can get there. They can be really helpful to sort of help with activities. I mean, I would use them maybe for something like athletics, if you're learning combinations of jumps and you put the feet down for the right foot, left foot, so they know exactly what they need to be doing with their feet. Using specialist and sensory equipment, again, is a good one. So sensory balls, things like those Velcro hand catchers. So you literally just have to put your hand out to catch the ball as opposed to trying to catch a ball is great. And then, yeah, things like catching a beanbag can be easier to grasp hold of, or foam balls. But yeah, brilliant ideas there for adapting with equipment.
And then the P stands for people. So when we talk about people, we're thinking about like the size of teams and groups. So you might reduce a game from 5-a-side to 3-a-side to encourage all participants to participate equally. So with larger pupils, with larger teams, some pupils can get overlooked by peers or might not get passed to. So by reducing the size of the team, they're more likely to get involved, and it just encourages them to get involved and encourages their peers to involve them too. Thinking about careful grouping as well, so trying to have teams that are playing against each other that are fairly even ability wise. So you might choose to use mixed ability teams, or you might choose to put two sort of more able teams together, put all the more able children together, split them into two teams and have them go against each other. And then do the same for sort of some of the less able pupils. But what you really want to avoid is having sort of a team full of more able pupils against a team of less able pupils, because it's not challenging the more able pupils, and it's not good for the less able pupils' confidence either, or their development. And another thing that you could do is have a pupil on like an individual task, work with a supportive adult or with a peer. So they might do things like give some verbal cues or verbal reminders. They might support, like in the picture, like the teacher's doing with balance, and also sort of it's really important to ensure that this person's someone that individual feels comfortable working with and works well with.
Right, so I'm going to give you a scenario now. Thinking about the STEP principles, how would you how could you adapt a striking activity, for example, tennis or cricket or rounders, for a pupil who is finding it difficult to connect with a moving ball? So how could you either do something with the space or the actual task, the equipment or the people, to help that child who is finding it difficult to connect with a moving ball? Amazing. Reduce space between, give a larger bat, bigger racket or ball with a bell in it, move close together, start with the ball on a cone, then develop into rolling, then throwing, reduce the space, use a larger ball or balloon. brilliant. Oh, football rounders instead of standard rounders, amazing. So adapt the task. Some great ideas. Yeah, I mean, I jotted down or listed some similar ideas. I think you've probably covered them all, but with a task, you could let the ball bounce once or twice. So perhaps maybe in tennis, you could let the ball bounce twice before hitting it, or even just rolling it along the ground to be hit along the floor. You said these increase the surface area of the bat or use a larger ball. Using your hand, you can just use your hand instead of having to use another implement to try and connect with the ball. And then I think someone mentioned using a cone. So yeah, you can get things like batting tees in cricket. The ball is already balanced and they just have to try and connect with it. So it's not take away the moving element, but tons of great ideas there, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant ideas. So we're just going to move on now to look at the active inclusion model. So the active inclusion model is a participant-focused model of sport and physical activity. So it's basically used to make sure that all participants have got a quality and meaningful experience in the lesson or in the activity that you've planned. And it uses the step principle that we've just spoken about to adapt and modify activities. So there's 4 types of activity that we talk about. So there's open, modified, parallel, and specific. So an open activity is one where everyone in the group can participate and access the activity without you needing to adapt it at all. It's important to remember here, though, that an open activity for one group of pupils might not be open for another group, depending on their needs. So it's really unique to the group or the children that you're working with. Warm-up games are quite often open activities where sort of all pupils participate, all pupils follow the same rules and everyone can access it. Another example are things like inclusive sports, so things like sitting volleyball or table cricket, because they are accessible for all.
So, okay, is it me? It's me next, is it? Yes. So I was going to say just with the open activity before. So even when I go into teaching in the local school now, I teach both the year groups, and I'm sure you all have this in your school settings as well, where I can teach the lesson to the first class and it goes exactly to plan and it's how I'd intended, and then exactly the same activities, exactly the same lesson I'll then teach to the other class, and it ends up completely different. It turns out completely differently. And obviously it is all to do with the group of children that you have and how they can access the activities. A modified activity is where everyone takes part in the same activity, but the activity is modified. So that's basically where you would bring in the step principles for some of the participants. So changing the space, the task, or adapting your activity with different types of equipment or people, bigger teams, smaller teams, supporting individuals or groups. But I would say this is probably pretty common practice in most mainstream school settings, where you would differentiate your lesson accordingly for your different abilities.
And then there's parallel activities. So that's where pupils are organised into groups depending on their skill level for the activity. So each group will do a variation of that given activity. So if you were supporting in an athletics lesson, you might give a group different size or different height hurdles appropriate for both their size and their ability level. And in the picture below with the agility ladders, that's actually one that Amy taught. And she used it. So one group stepped through. The original task was 2 foot to 2 foot jumping through the agility ladders. But one group stepped through the agility ladders, another jumped forwards, and another jumped sideways through the agility ladders, sort of to simplify and add challenge. But it's really important to remember here as well, how you group the pupils for one skill or for one activity would be different to how you would group them for another skill. So for example, if you're looking at a jumping lesson in athletics how you group the activities for how you group the children for a parallel activity would be completely different to how you might group children for a parallel activity for a lesson on roles in gymnastics.
And then the last one is specific activity, where a child or group of children take part in a specific activity that's specific to the sport and or to their needs. So an example that I can think of recently when I've been teaching PE would be, it was an indoor lesson and it was athletics. I think it was raining, so we had to go inside, sadly. And because of the sort of acoustics in the hall or the gym, it was really quite loud and busy. And there was a child, a neurodiverse child who was struggling a little bit with that. And it was a throwing activity. So I literally moved a smaller activity for him off to the side, gave him the option of doing it by himself, which he was much happier doing. Before that, he wasn't really taking part at all because it was all a bit too much and overwhelming for him. And I moved everything closer together so that he was able to sort of achieve the task, achieve the aim every single time. And that worked really well. So he was given a specific activity. And sometimes it is really tricky to, if you have to think on your feet like that. So I guess with you guys, the benefit is that if you are supporting an individual child or you have a group of children that prior to the lesson, you can make the specific activity to suit their needs. But sometimes you have to think off the top of your head. And sometimes it works, sometimes it might not. But hopefully some of these ideas will help you with making them work more often.
So now we're going to have a look at a few barriers that you might encounter sort of when you're supporting in PE lessons. So I know we find that there's a lot of pupils that have difficulty following verbal instructions. In the classroom, it's sort of much easier to support them because you've got so many resources around, like word maps, number lines, you've got everything you need there. And then suddenly we move into the hall or move into the playground, and all those resources that are normally available to you aren't there to support. But something that I think is really, really important is using visual prompts. So you could use things like the skills teaching cards, which these are included in all of our Move PE lessons, but we've also now made them available separately too. So these show clear step-by-step instructions. They've also got written prompts, which you could use to support, or for pupils in Key Stage 2 might be able to read them too. You also might like to use like visual markers. So for example, if you're teaching rolling, you might like to place a marker on the floor to show where you need to place your foot when you step forward, and it just gives that visual reminder that you have to step forward. Also pre-teaching is so useful, as it is in sort of every subject, things like maths, things like phonics, where you might pre-teach, because then pupils already know the steps and they can already access the activity when it comes to the PE lesson. And physically demonstrating the movements, a really, I think, useful sequence, similar to maths mastery, is I do, we do, you do. So first of all, the adult demonstrates, the pupils watch. Second, we do, so you do it together, you talk through each step by step. And then next, you do. So for you do, you might still give the verbal cues as they're doing it, and you might need to repeat the I do and we do steps multiple times before pupils are able to do the you do independently.
Just on that one as well, sorry, Dan, I was just thinking, if you don't feel comfortable or confident doing the moves, then it's always great just to get one of your more able children in the class to sort of carry out the forward roll or whatever it is. I've had moments where I would always try and do the forward roll, but sometimes it's probably best if somebody else did it instead of me. But yeah, so yeah, behaviour. So if these are just sort of ideas and tips of ways to help with behaviour within the PE or the sports activity that you might be delivering or supporting the delivery of. And also, a lot of these are not just going to be helping children that might find it difficult sometimes to access the PE lesson, or to makes it inclusive for and benefits all of the children within the class. So explaining the lesson sequence beforehand so they know what's coming. The number of times, you know, the kids will come out and they'll be like, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? And there are some kids that really need to know and want to know what they're doing, rather than just inquisitively asking. So explaining the lesson sequence, which you could then make that part of your routine for every single PE lesson. So developing a routine where they know it will start with X, Y, and Z. Other things that help with routines, lessons indoors, in a gym or a hall, would be where we take our shoes off, where we put our shoes, what we do when we come into the hall, not spin on our bottoms and then do a quick few laps around before we then all sit down. And it's like the expectations and the developing the routines. Obviously within the actual lesson itself, this is a beneficial thing for all of the children, but limit queuing time, so making smaller groups, so that you haven't got lots of kids waiting, and also it then keeps them active for as much as the lesson as possible. Limiting games where pupils are out, and if there are games where they get out, there's something else for them to do, practicing skills on the side, or picking up something else to practice, or do with somebody else on the side. Carefully managing competition, whilst competition, is part of the national curriculum. Providing competitive situations for children. Lots of children do find that tricky sometimes. So maybe focusing on like your personal best. So competition with yourself. If you did 5 this time, let's see if you can do 6 next time. Familiarizing the child with the space and the rules. PE is always that one where I think, because it's sort of outside the classroom, as much familiarization with the space and obviously rules of games that you can have will help with behaviour. Careful grouping, we've Danny spoken about that before. Using the visual prompts, which our skills posters we have in all of our lesson packs are really great for, and often I don't think happen in PE lessons. You've actually got something to show the children so they can see how it's done. And pupil voice.
And now we're just going to move on to talk about pupils that might have difficulty with motor skills and some of the ways that you can support them. So you could use slower moving equipment. I know someone mentioned about balloons before. Balloons are absolutely brilliant. They're like your secret weapon in PE teaching. Great for developing hand-eye coordination. And because they float and there's so much slower moving, it gives children time to sort of anticipate and plan their response. Another thing that you could do is use slightly deflated balls for when they're travelling along the ground in sports like football. They roll along the ground slightly slower. So again, it gives children just slightly more time to respond and prepare. Using lighter equipment, again, lighter air balls, things like balloons, even a rolled up pair of socks is great for throwing and catching. They're just that bit lighter. The other great thing about a pair of socks is it doesn't roll off like a tennis ball does. So it sort of acts like a beanbag in that sense, but it's also lighter. Interventions, I know we spoke before about pre-teaching as well. I know that everyone's so limited on time, but you could also incorporate some physical activity or skills into interventions. So, for example, if you were doing underarm throwing in PE and you were doing math intervention with a pupil that was finding that difficult, you might do throwing the beanbags into the hoops. So having 2 hoops, having 10 beanbags and sort of throwing the beanbags into the hoops, adding up how many beanbags you've got in total, sort of like how you do to show the part whole model. And also sort of like breaking down the skills that are actually needed. So particularly in Key Stage 2, where we start to combine the fundamental movement skills, break down the skills that are needed, because if you were doing hurdles and a pupil was really struggling with that, it might be that actually they haven't mastered a 1 foot to 1 foot jump. So you need to break it down into running. Okay, have they mastered the skill of running? Yes. Okay, let's have a look at 1 foot to 1 foot jumping and work to master that. And then once they have mastered that, you can start to combine the skills together again and have a go at running and 1 foot to 1 foot jumping in the hurdles. But I think the main thing really to reiterate here is practice, practice, practice. Get practice in as much as possible. This might be at break time with planned activities, in interventions. You might do some sort of like physically active learning within their lesson as well. We've got some really, really lovely resources as well to support with these. So we've got loads of ideas for motor skill interventions or playtime activities that you could do. So we've got balance and movement ideas, strength and coordination, object control and body awareness. And we're also sort of looking to make some more of these. And the great thing is it's not just one activity. There's loads of activities on there. So you've got plenty that you can sort of cycle through.
So yeah, including inclusive sports into your PE lessons, or perhaps just an after-school club or a lunchtime club, or intra-school competitions. So rather than it being a netball tournament, it could be an inclusive sport that you have a competition, an intra competition within the school. And that is done, that's available for all of the children. I think on the next slide, we've got some examples of some inclusive sports. So table cricket, I talked earlier about one of the step principles with space and doing the activity on a tabletop, which you can do table cricket, and there's information about how to do that. There's bocce, which is a bit like sort of bowls. It's an inclusive sport. New age curling, which is adapted game of curling itself, and then goalball, which is a team sport designed for athletes with a vision impairment. There's also seated volleyball, so it's like designed for it to be a level playing field for everybody, and they all do it from sitting on the floor. The benefits of inclusive sports like these, the activities like these, is they provide an opportunity for young people to learn together and discover each other's similarities rather than their differences. It obviously improves motor skill development, improved confidence, and increased independence. You know, a lot of the kids would hopefully be able to do these by themselves and work together as a team of mixed ability groups. And for those without a disability, playing these games, obviously there's lots of benefits for them as well. So increased understanding of diversity and an increased respect and acceptance of individual differences. And obviously these are like life skills, which from being a sports person myself, I know playing sport gives kids so many different skills that they can take further on into their adult life. I think that's it. Yeah, so we've got all of these ideas for activities on our website. And I just think, yeah, it would be lovely to have an intra-school competition maybe that was an inclusive sport rather than a traditional English netball, football, or as well as.
And then that sort of moves nicely into competition. So school sport is hugely beneficial for all pupils. It's a great opportunity to experience being part of a team, working together, and it's a chance for everyone really to shine and excel, as well as being a really enjoyable experience for everyone. The school games organisation, who organise lots of school sport competitions, so I'm sure your school will have participated in things like cross country. That's all organised by the school games, and they're brilliant. They work in every area of the country. But they also have competitions that are designed specifically for pupils with SEND. One of the competitions that I've taken pupils to for is the primary pentathlon. So this is a multi-sport event, but all of the sports are accessible and adaptable for all pupils. So every single pupil can go and participate. It's so well run, it's really well organised. And if your school isn't already involved and you haven't had pupils that have gone to the pentathlon that you think actually would really benefit from this experience, If you speak to your school PE lead, they will have contact with your the local school games organizer, and they'll also have access to the calendar, which has all the events on. So they'll be able to find the primary pentathlon and hopefully get some pupils involved. It's also something that you could speak to your SENCO about. If your PE lead sort of doesn't have access to this information, your SENCO will also be able to get in contact with your school games organizer. If you have pupils as well who express a real interest in sport, you could look for sort of like local pathways, local sports clubs, and suggest these to parents and carers. For pupils with sort of specific disabilities, you can also look on the Disability Sport website, which give loads and loads of information on local clubs and how you can get pupils involved in your area.
Okay, so a little bit of a plug for the Twinkl Move scheme that we have, and some other resources and how they can help you. So every single unit that we have for the year groups, year 1 to year 6, will have a unit overview, and in there would be obviously what's included within the unit, but also some generalized ideas and suggestions for how to include children with disabilities throughout the whole unit. So it might be that, you know, there are suggestions for things, but that wouldn't perhaps come up until lesson 2 or 3, but just lots of ideas there that are helpful, including children with SEND within the unit. I think we've also got
I was just going to say on that, Amy, I think another important thing maybe to think about is, even if your school doesn't use the Move scheme of work, if you were teaching athletics to year 3, you could still download the year 3 athletics overview, the unit overview, and you would see some suggestions there that would actually be able to help you, and you could apply to sort of any athletics unit, because they're all going to teach fairly similar things.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. And our lesson plans, our detailed lesson plans, usually follow the step principles within them to differentiate the activities. So you'd have the main activity, and then a way to make it more accessible and inclusive and easier, and then a way to make it more challenging for the more able children. And like I say, they normally follow the step principles that we've gone through today.
And then I'm just going to quickly talk about Twinkl Swim. So for those of you that do support with school swimming, we have got a new swimming scheme that the first unit of this will be on the website in August, as I mentioned earlier. We've also already got some swimming games cards and some warm-up and cool-down cards for swimming on the website, which has ideas for differentiation, also ideas for if you haven't got any equipment or how you could differentiate using equipment. We're also hoping to run a TeachMeet on this in sort of September time. So for anyone that does support with school swimming, keep an eye out for this. And then just finally, if you are looking for a specific resource and you can't find it, or if you need some extra support or advice with some of our resources, you can always request a resource or ask for support and advice by emailing Twinkl Cares, and they'll pass your request or query directly to our team, and then one of our specialist PE team will be able to sort of either create the resource or answer your query or sort of give you a bit more support. You could also tweet us. Our sort of Twitter handle is @TwinklMovePE, and also sort of sharing any activity ideas or anything that you've done. Sort of we love to see all sorts of like different PE activities, and love seeing our resources in action as well. So if you do sort of put anything online, feel free to tag us or also tweet us sort of asking for any support or advice with anything PE. And then there's just sort of 10 top tips and takeaways from this, because I know we've given you loads and loads of information. There's loads to digest, but these are sort of, if you're going to take anything away, these are sort of like the top 10 things to take away.